Hey guys, and welcome back to another video of Kerbal Space Program. Now, in today's video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a relay network around the Kerbin System. So that will be a series of 4 satellites in low Kerbin orbit, a series of 4 satellites in Kerbal stationary orbit. I'll explain that more in a minute. And some satellites around both Minmus and the Moon. And both of them will be 4 satellites around each. Now, reasoning behind this is I feel like I have a need to have more unmanned missions, such as the rover I did. And you don't see it in this video, but due to this network, I was able to recover the science from the rover I did make that crashed, but let's not talk about that. And so yeah, this mission is also going to be a landing on the Moon. At the very end, I'm going to land on the Moon, get some science, and return to Kerbin. Now, that means it's a manned mission, and it's a long mission. Just for reference, the reason this video is going at such a fast rate is due to the fact that this is 8 hours of footage that you're watching. This took a long time. And so these Kerbals were in orbit for about, I seem to think, 90 days or something. So, yeah, not a short amount of time. So, yeah, the rocket is just a series of satellites on a strut. It's a really powerful rocket, and it's actually one of the best rockets I've ever designed so far. Because of the upstage, the delivery stage, I am so proud of that thing. It is really well designed. You could use it for sort of any mission you could ever dream of. You could go to Elu with it, probably. Like, seriously, it's really good. Elu, Jewel, anywhere. Now, what this thing has is it has a series of 16 solid rocket boosters, because this thing weighs a lot. It's got 16 satellites on board, a landing module, and a fairly big upstage. As you can see, I'm using the Oscar B tanks as sort of reserve tanks, and these are going to work in an asparagus staging. So what will happen is one tank will empty, all the other ones will be full, you'll ditch that tank, and then the next one will slowly deplete fuel, while the others remain full, ditch that, and so on and so forth. Now, for our first orbit, which will be our low Kerbin orbit, what we are aiming for is an orbit of 324,566.1 meters by 100,000 meters, and this is your injection orbit. Now, the injection orbit means that the orbital period between the 4 satellites is correct. You can find calculators online. I'll try and put one in the description. And what it'll do is it'll calculate what injection orbit you need based on the number of satellites, the height of your orbit, and what body you're doing around. So what we're doing here is we're just getting into this orbit, and then what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit of time just tuning the orbit a little bit. What is really useful to use here is your thrust limiter on your engine, and use your retrograde markers and stuff. Very useful thing to do. It allows more precision, and it just makes it generally a little bit easier to perform these kind of missions. And as you'll see, that is the final time I will use a maneuver node for one of these orbits, because it's not a good idea. Generally, you want to be using your prograde retrograde. Just use them, and use your thrust limiter to limit you, like 0.5 is what I normally did. So what we're doing here is we're going to slowly release each satellite one at a time. And what you do is once you get to periapsis with that satellite, you circularize. You then go back to the mothership, which is the main ship we're flying right now. You then release the next satellite at apoapsis. Now, this is important. The reason you do this is because it means that when you spin around, they come away from the mothership much better. As long as you time warp, you need to time warp to force them away. And that's really ideal because it means you don't compromise your orbit at all. Because technically you're still in the same orbit even though you're going at a different speed. Kerbal logic, don't worry about it. So yeah, you want to release some apoapsis each time, and every time you hit periapsis, you circularize the next satellite until you have your 4 satellites up, or how many other satellites you're doing. I'm doing 4, you might be doing 12 or 3. Most people do 3, you don't really need 4. The reason I did 4 is it was easier to put on the ship to do 4. Though I could have just done 3 anyway, but it would have had a asymmetrical release, if that makes sense. So yeah. So what we're doing here is we're literally just releasing satellites and circularizing them around Kerbin. It's not glamorous, it's pretty dull. Now what these satellites are equipped with is they're equipped with a relay dish, a probe core, several solar panels, a battery, Oscar B tank, and a spark engine. Now, a spark engine's overkill. I would have preferred an electric propulsion engine, but I don't have any, because I haven't unlocked them on the science tree yet. So, yeah, I just use a spark. It's a high thrust to weight ratio, really good. Also, sorry, something I forgot, they also have SAS wheels, and due to the size of the craft, these SAS wheels are really, really effective, and that's ideal for orientation stuff. As you can see, there is no auto SAS on these, so what you have to do is you have to do the maneuver node yourself and look on these maneuver nodes and stay on, which is actually harder than you think. But yeah, so literally, this mission is a very laborious task. It shouldn't have taken 8 hours. I messed up a couple of times, and it cost me time. But what you're sort of aiming for is to get satellites up and around all the areas you need them. Now, relay satellites are really, really important as you go on, because you're going to send unmanned missions to places such as Eve. You might send some to the moon, and you want to be able to relay stuff from these planets. So, for the minute, we only have full coverage on Minmus and the moon from the far side. And that's the big point of putting satellite networks around these places, so you can have these far side sort of connections. It allows for better probe control. You don't have to worry about not having probe control on the far side of planets or moons, and this is really good. The only problem is if you don't have enough electric charge. But anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm just quickly fine-tuning all the orbits just to make sure that they're exactly 100 by 100 kilometers. And the reason for this is you want to try and maintain this orbital period as best as possible. I accepted about a meter or 2 out. It's not that big a deal. It would take so long for these to meet up that it's pointless just spending more and more time trying to circularize them. It's also, again, I've said this is a really laborious mission. It gets laborious when you do stuff like that. But anyway, so what we're doing here now is we are setting up the apoapsis for our geostationary injection orbit. So a geostationary orbit, first off, is an orbit where you, relative to the surface of Kerbin, you stay in the same place. So if, for example, you were above the KSC, you would stay above the KSC if you're at this altitude. So the injection orbit is 3,974,349.9 meters by 2,863,330 meters. The latter of the two being the orbit you're going to circularize to. This is the geostationary orbit. Now, again, we're going to put 4 satellites at this height. Again, not necessary, but it's what we're doing. And the reason for this is just so we have a really good coverage of sort of this Kerbin area. These satellites will be very good for relaying to Kerbin, not around Kerbin. The low Kerbin satellites are very good for doing around Kerbin. These ones will be much better at getting signal for further relays. Now, these relay dishes that I use in this aren't the biggest, and I'm not completely sure how useful they will actually be. I hope they will be very useful. And I actually see no reason why I can't put more satellites up as I go, and that'll probably be what I do. I might put some around the sun. Not the sun, Kerbal, as it's called in this game. But, yeah. There I accidentally detached one of the external fuel tanks. Not that I had no intention of doing it, but I forgot that I had to stage. What I had to do is I had to restage it every time because I didn't know how much fuel I'd use to get into these injection orbits. So I didn't know how much of this sort of thing would die, if you understand what I'm saying. So what we're doing here is we're releasing our satellites, and I'm actually just thrusting away from the mothership slightly, just so I don't sort of run into it as such. Yeah, these again, this is just the same drill again. We're releasing satellites, circularizing them at the correct orbit. Now, just to be sure, these are only rough orbits, they don't need to be exact yet. There's no pressure to have them exact yet. You're only going to lose sort of very small margins on their perfectness. Yeah, it's not that big a deal. Though, if you were to put it a fair ways out, like a few hundred meters out, you can have problems, such as I did in the first one, where one of the satellites was a little bit out, so I had to time warp it and just fix it and put it into the correct position. And that's why you come back and redo them. You can fix their orbits if they're going faster or slower than they need to be. It's no big deal. Yeah, as you can see, some of these are really close calls on the mothership. Like, eeks. Yeah. So, how many more? I think we have one more satellite to circularize around, here. And then we are done. So, after this, we are going to the Minmus, to do a little satellite network around there. Now, at Minmus, what we're going to do is we're going to do a satellite network of 50k by 50k. Again, what you can see here is me just fixing all these orbits so that they're more ideal, and so that they don't like catch up with each other, and also so they're actually kerbostationary. You want them sort of as perfectly circularized as you can get them. That's the ideal sort of way of doing it. And yeah, that's what we're doing right here. We're just quickly circularizing around all these satellites, and yeah, so now what we're doing is we're sorting out inclination so that we get a better Minmus encounter. You can actually do this in your Kerbin orbit here because you're so high already. It's not that big a deal. I actually got a fairly good Minmus encounter fairly quickly. I fine-tuned it a lot. Just sort of try and get as close to our aim as possible. You're sort of at Minmus, you're aiming for an orbit of 85,287.4 by 50,000 meters. And I just aimed as close as I could get to that. The closer the better. It's not that big a deal. It would not have taken that much out of it at all. As you can see, I really didn't get that close. But what I did is I did lower to 50k. But yeah. Now, as you can see at this point, we are already on the 66th day of this mission. As I was saying, this does take a long time to do. What they would do in real life is, if they were doing something like this, they would probably just release them very swiftly, get them all out and in a kind of orbit, and then sort of fiddle with them after the main mission's done. They wouldn't use a crew for this kind of mission either, but because it's a dual mission, with our plan on landing on the moon, because I needed to make up for the fact that the last moon landing wasn't exactly that good, but hey ho. I did make up for it, by the way. Very good. But yeah, so in real life, there's a couple of options. So you could have the SpaceX option, where they release them all in one big bundle, and they use not xenon thrusters, actually. They use krypton in SpaceX because it's cheaper, even though it's not quite as good, but the difference is minimal. Or you could do the similar thing of getting this injection orbit, and you just release them every orbit, and then if you would put it into multiple orbits, like I am, which I don't think any mothership ever would, but if they were, what they would probably do is just release them into the injection orbit, circularize the satellites, have and then just, not perfectly by the way, and then using the xenon thrusters sort of optimize their orbit. Or they might put all the satellites into an injection orbit and then slowly circularize them using much better maths than I have available to me. So what you're seeing here is just us finishing off our little Minmus network. Now the Minmus network, you can have a really low altitude of 50k, because Minmus is so small that a back satellite can connect with a side satellite fairly easily, and that means that you can just communicate perfectly fine. As you'll find out, at Mun, I did mess this up and put it at a 50k orbit, and that's too low. At Mun, you need, I think the altitude I've been told is 75k, just to sort of have them connect. I went for 100k after I realised how I'd messed up, just to round the numbers. It just means that it's a lot easier. You know what altitude they're going to be at, so you can sort of know that they're there, I guess. Now, something I should have probably considered is not putting them into these perfect round numbers and putting them into sort of 51 kilometer orbits or 105 kilometer orbits, just so they're not in the way of any ships I'm attempting to land or space stations I'm putting up. Because, for example, if I want to put a lunar gateway on the moon, I probably am going to put it at 100 kilometers, because that's probably the best altitude for it. So at some point I might redo this network, with newest dishes, all this, all that, different altitudes and stuff. The geostationary one, not geo, geostationary, it's fair enough, because that's the only altitude it works at, but the others I kind of wish I'd put them at different altitudes, sort of 105 kilometers, 55 kilometers, sort of a different height, and just have that as our universal height for satellites. It's a bit like a frequency, if you imagine. You have a bandwidth of frequency, and for example, Wi-Fi is on 3 gigahertz, 5.5 gigahertz, and 1.6 gigahertz, I think. So it would be a bit like that. So all the other frequencies are reserved for these other spacecraft. It's a bit like that, I guess. But yeah. So what we did at the moon is we had a really inclined orbit. I hope I did fix this. The way you fix it is you go to your line where you cross the equator, and you sort of use your radial in, radial out node to correct it so it's as equatorial as you can possibly get it. Then what I'm doing is I'm using my thrust limiter on my main cheater engine. The cheater engine, by the way, did an absolute job on this mission. The efficiency it has is incredible. It's not a nuclear engine or anything, but I prefer not to use nuclear engines where possible, because I kind of find nuclear engines a little bit OP, because the matter of the fact is that nuclear engines haven't been hypothetically proven yet. By the way, what you can see here is I'm just deorbiting the old satellites I had up around the moon from last episode when I did the moon landing, because I don't want sort of two sets of satellites at such a similar height. It's pointless, and the satellites I did set up were kind of pointless because they were too low, I believe. Were they? I can't remember what height they were. I think they were too low. But anyway, yeah, nuclear engines, I avoid them where possible, but I will probably be using them for interplanetary missions. Hypothetically, definitely possible. But you have to consider stuff like the radiation effects. Though, let's be honest, this is outer space. The radiation is absolutely monumental. And this is Kerbal Space Program as well. We don't have things like the Van Allen radiation belts, which the sort of all these missions to the moon, I just called the real moon the mun, that's epic, all these missions to the moon have to avoid, such as in Apollo 11. They went through the least radiant areas of it, and that sort of aspect of this is lacking in this game. But I'm glad it's lacking, because I think this game would be absolutely awful if you had this stuff. It would be so complicated. And when you look at this game, it's actually kind of a kid's game. It's really not, because it's really complicated. Like, you just have to look at your Kerbal engineer outputs and realise, damn, this is complicated. But you know, the style of the game, how it looks, and it's kind of the hardness and the death goriness, maybe. Like, you don't have life support systems, so you can't kill a Kerbal like that. You don't actively kill a Kerbal, they just poof. It's very PG, and I think radiation would make that a bit too scary, I guess, and also it'd make the game too complicated. Like, I think it would be too much of a limiting factor. But anyway, yeah, I was on about nuclear engines and I got onto that. Also, aerospike engines, hate them. I can't stand looking at them. They're a really cool idea, but they'll never work. No, that's a lie. They do work, but for the foreseeable future, they will not work to an efficiency and an adeptitude. Is that the right word? I don't think it is, but hey ho. To a degree where they can operate. Sort of the problem with aerospikes is the cone bit gets far too hot, and it means that they just don't work a lot of the time. Anyway, what I'm doing here, I should get back onto this. We're landing on the moon now. So what I did is I'm using my cheater stage as much as I can to kill off as much velocity as possible. As you can see, it still has 1,300 meters or 1,200 now meters a second of delta V in it. That is incredible for how big a mission this was. Like, I've been to all the moons of Kerbin and Kerbin, odd orbits, and this went surprisingly well. This is the second time I landed on this save. The first time I tried to land twice, and I was about 10 meters a second short of getting back to Kerbin. I couldn't quite get into the atmosphere to aerobrake. I had to use my monopropellant, everything. I just couldn't quite make it. So what I do here is I just, as you can see, I'm using my monopropellant because I was very conscious of running out of fuel. Here, I didn't actually land on the moon twice, so it meant that I was a lot better off. But I was still a little conscious. I also quite like using monopropellant. It's actually a really good option. Like, it got me... I have 2 tanks and monopropellant on here. It got me over 200 meters a second of delta V. That's a lot when you think about it. But anyway, what we're doing here is we are using the last of my monopropellant to just come in to land. And then ditching the lower stage, using the thermal shield to take the brunt of the force, and landing. I didn't say what we did on the moon. Basically, we landed in the far side crater. Just got some science with the science I put on board. We actually got a lot more science than you would expect from this mission. And you'll see that in a minute. And yeah, we come to a smooth landing in the desert. So we got a grand total of 630 science. That was a lot to me. Now, my temptation was to get heavy rocketry, because I love the engines in heavy rocketry. However, I was a bit more sensible about it, and I was like, okay, I need to get landing stuff. I got some command pods. I think I get electronics. I don't know, though. I need to watch. I was really considering that relay dish, because I was like, I got the bottom one, which I'm not quite sure what that was. And yeah, so this is the network we have. And yeah, hope you guys all really enjoyed this. If you did, like, and yeah,